And speaking of these four consents in centering prayer, some examples might be of some help in dealing with the inevitable thoughts, even when they've been moderated by a fairly long process, because you never know when the spirit is going to reach a pocket of unconsciousness that had escaped the former therapies, and you may have a few bad days, let us say, where you really, it feels like you were back in the night of spirit again, or worse. And sometimes external circumstances that you'd never been prepared for. God always seems to be stretching us, opening us to further horizons, or challenging us to go beyond our boundaries, so to speak, into new territory, and to experience there not so much success, but our weakness, perhaps, or the intensity of God's kindness and mercy, or the extent. We may be very grateful to God for all His good things, but all of a sudden we come across some unconscious material that pulls us up short, and we realize just how unpleasant and disagreeable, perhaps even loathsome, our behavior was. We hadn't realized it. And so our appreciation of the extent of God's forgiveness or mercy or consideration explodes into new dimensions. So the spiritual journey is really about God, not us, and the skill with which He deals with our woundedness in all its various forms. I even wonder if God is a little puzzled, or if that's possible, or has some self-doubts about putting us in such a terrible situation in which we're neither fish nor fowl, and stuck between heaven and earth and crucified there. And so here's a little example that might be helpful about how the grace of the centering prayer works. Sometimes the thoughts are overwhelming, and it seems it's useless to sit here and just be bombarded by thoughts and memories and so on. But often, sometimes it's some peace comes at the end of the thing. But as this prayer deepens, it's somewhat like an airplane, taking off in an airplane, a jet, a nice, good plane, in something of a snowstorm, or in a place where there are lots of clouds, and so you get off the ground, but then you encounter such turbulence that the plane bounces all over the place, and the other passengers are screaming, and the crew is falling down. And in other words, it feels like the most unsafe milieu you've ever been in. But meanwhile, the pilots have all the engines running, and they're constantly rising, and little by little the clouds begin to thin out, and all of a sudden you come out into this space where there's no clouds, and there's 180 degrees of sheer spaciousness. And then everybody calms down and starts screaming, and the service continues, and everything returns to normal. But you're in this spaciousness, and it's a very different psychological feeling from being in the clouds and having every now and then the plane seem to run into bumps or fall a couple of thousand feet, and things like that. So similarly, as we do the prayer, and you just stay there, confident that the engines are going to work, and that you just don't get concentrate on the bumps and the scowls, and at some point, spaciousness occurs. So emptiness, the practice of kenosis, of letting our thoughts go, when we can't let them go because the circumstances are so intense, we're immersed in the difficulties rather than with the rising thrust of the wings and the plane itself. So often at times when we do the centering prayer then in a somewhat advanced stage, there's the experience of spaciousness and of total receptivity. In other words, we feel ourselves to be surrendered to God, and it's safe and delightful, and that it has no end, and that there's no inclination to think about it. In other words, God seems not to be too interested in the furniture in his house. He likes spaciousness. It provides him with absolute freedom. So surrender becomes more nuanced. It's an absolute kind of letting go, and it includes, well, suppose I get sick or suppose I die. It doesn't make much difference. It's the presence of God, who even in absolute absence psychologically is closer to us than we are to ourselves. And so the freedom from identifying God with just good feelings or consolations, or even the pure awareness, which is a kind of ecstatic frame of mind where there's no thought at all and no inclination to the thought and no desire to reflect on it, or no thought of prolonging it, and it just is, and this really is telling us who we are. We just are too. This is the level of being rather than doing. But this extraordinary consciousness God is giving us, is trying to help us to reach. But still he puts us into a situation that makes it as difficult as possible to get there or to remain there.